I'll pull her up and see what she wants. Okay, we're going to go ahead and get started. Everyone can get settled in. There is one announcement we need to make before moving forward. I know on your agendas, it says for advanced scenarios next session that you'll go to room 203. But if you've been here for any length of time, since there's a big majority of that group, we're going to stay in here. And if you're new or in group A, then you're going to go to room 203. And we're going to keep the bulk of the people in the larger room, okay? So next session, if you're new to Migrant or fairly new to Migrant, you're going to go upstairs to room 203 and everyone else will stay in here, okay? All right, we're going to turn it over to Loopy so she can get started, and we're going to talk about selling our program. So go ahead, Loopy.
Thank you, LaRonda. All right, so welcome back, everyone. You should be seeing something on your screen now. So we are going to be talking about marketing our migrant program. Now that is super important because not only are you wanting to go and talk to families, but you also talk to other individuals that could be potential stakeholders. So what is it that we need to ensure we do to make sure we maximize our recruitment efforts when we're talking to folks? So our objectives for today are to the goals and components of an eligibility interview. So we're going to understand the difference between leading and open-ended questions. There's one of those groups of questions we want to stay completely away from when we're having conversations with families or potential stakeholders. Marketing the MEP. We're going to discuss the purpose of an elevator pitch and what is an elevator pitch and understanding their keywords and importance. So there are certain keywords that we're going to be trying to hone in on and certain that we're trying to completely remove because of potential negative impact when we're talking to families. And then we're going to talk about useful interview skills. So these are where we're going to review types of questions that establish MEP eligibility and recognizing when additional questions are necessary. So we're going to go through some clarifying questions in case you come up with a scenario where the family isn't giving you the type of information that you believe you need in order to make a good eligibility determination. So goals and components of an eligibility interview. This is Migrant under the Every Student Succeeds Act. So during the interview, you are trying to establish the most recent time that child made a qualifying move, either as, with, to join, or proceed, someone who is a migratory agricultural worker or who has been established a migratory agricultural worker. Now you do these in two ways. One is you want to ensure that you're asking, do we have someone who meets the definition of a migratory agricultural worker? There are several components that must be met in order for us to say, yes, this individual, whether it's mom or dad or uncle or grandma or grandpa, they meet the definition of a migratory agricultural worker. You get all that information from your eligibility fundamental or eligibility guidance. That's where all that comes from. The second question is asking, do the children meet the definition of a migratory child? When you're talking to parents, are these children meeting the criteria necessary in order for us to say, yes, these children do meet the definition of these migratory children? And again, there are components that must be met in order for that to happen. Now, during the interview, you really want to have some goals in mind. The first is you want to ensure that you're explaining the migrant education program. Now, in order to understand to explain the migrant program, you have to be able to understand it. What type of services are you providing? Because not every migrant program provides the same type of services. It just depends on the area or on your co-op. Or even in parts of the country, you might be having a family that is used to getting a lot more perks or benefits in their area where they came from than in yours. You need to be able to indicate the benefits of the migrant program. And again, what is available in your area, and explaining to families that even though we are one program, our goal and our mission is to ensure that all of these children get proper benefits and services, that we're not all the same, and just depending regionally or where we're at. You want to ensure that you're identifying potential leads. This is really important because this is going to give you more people to talk to, whether it's family leads or whether it's possible stakeholder leads. And ultimately, you really want to determine eligibility for the migrant program. So when you're talking to these people, now that you've got them hooked, what are you going to tell them, or what questions are you going to ask them to ensure that they qualify or not? Now, keeping in mind that not everybody's going to qualify, not everyone's going to meet eligibility criteria, and that just comes with the territory. So for all of the new recruiters out there who think, I've talked to 10 people and nobody qualifies, am I doing something wrong? No, you're actually just determining eligibility based on all the criteria that we need, and the families or people that you've spoken to simply don't meet that, and that's okay. And lastly, we want to make sure that we document eligibility for the migrant program and that we do it correctly, because ultimately you've talked to that family, you've talked to that OSY, you know that family story. We don't. So anybody who's reviewing the information that you put onto that certificate of eligibility should be able to sort of get a picture of the story of this individual that made him a migratory worker or a migratory child based on how you documented that information on that COE. So you need to learn how to properly document it in order for a third-party reviewer to say, yep, we agree with your eligibility determination. So we like to think of the interview involving two things, the science and the art. The science is more when recruiters understand the rules and regulations, how to properly complete the paperwork, how to analyze data, and how to make accurate eligibility determinations. Now, those are pretty simple to learn because you have your non-regulatory guidance or your blue book. If you don't have one yet, I'm sure your team will ensure that you get a copy. This is where we get all of our eligibility information. The second is that certificate of eligibility, whether it's in paper form or in tablet form. This is where we're documenting all of the information. Now, all of that you can learn to do. You can learn what to put in section 1. You can learn how to document in section 3. However, there's another component to the interview that's a little bit more challenging for people. And this is the recruiter's ability to talk to people one-on-one to elicit information that may be very personal. So even if you're a new recruiter, you're probably already understanding there's a lot of questions that we need to ask. And some of these questions may make our families or potential folks that we're talking to feel a little bit uneasy. And we understand that. So that's why we have that science and this artful way of interviewing families to ensure that you build rapport and that you get the information you need correctly. So recruiters really need to strike a balance between having a relaxed conversation and gathering the very specific information needed to determine child eligibility. So there are two different types of questions that we usually think of. One is leading questions. Now, as you can see by this diagram, you're kind of skipping over all of these little intricate maze, pathways. So that should already be a bit of a red flag. When a question is leading, the interviewer or you as a recruiter use language that suggests a particular answer. Most often, a simple yes or no answer. You lived here for less than 3 years, right? That's either going to be a yes or a no. However, open-ended questions do take a little longer to get to that final point, but it develops an open conversation. It elicits longer answers than just a yes or no. It solicits additional information from the interviewee or from who you're talking to, and you end up discovering more details in the process. So even though this might take a little longer, that's fine. There's no, every recruiter has their own way of interviewing families, and there's no right or wrong length of time that you spend with the family. What we want to ensure we do, however, is if we're spending long periods of time with the family, that we're doing it because we're clarifying information, not because we're struggling to get the initial conversation started. So I want to do this little activity right now. So if someone, I believe Holly or someone can go up to the podium, I'm just going to ask you a couple of questions, and you as a team or you as an individual can just yell it out. And Holly, if I can't hear them, if you could just repeat it, or if not Holly, someone else. So we have a list of leading questions. Now, I'm going to ask the leading question, and I want you to tell me how you would then switch that or change it from a leading question to more of an open-ended question. So our first question here is, you moved once the work ended in Georgia, right? Anybody?
So how would we reword this question to make it open-ended? What was that? What did you do once the work ended? few of them thrown at me. How many times did you move and when did you move from Georgia?
Okay. So when was the most recent time you returned to this area? Yeah, you're starting that open-ended with that when. The when, where, how, what. All that's how typically you want to start these conversations. Great. The second one, you came to this area to work with sweet potatoes, right?
Why did you come to this area?
Yeah, why or what type or kind of work are you currently doing? Or what type of work did you do when you first arrived? Yeah, great. Now, the whole family moves together, then returns together, right?
Feedback, hello. We're going to answer this. Did you all move together at once, family-wise?
Okay.
Or who made the move?
Yeah,
with you?
who made the move on, and then you can ask for the date in question. So if you've already established that they moved around a certain time frame, who made the move on that day? Again, when you're asking, when you start with did or you know, yes or no, that's sort of leading into you're only giving them two real choices then when you really want to elicit a longer answer. So who made the move on this date? Oh, well, I moved first with the kids and then my husband moved after the work was over. So you elicit a longer conversation. Now I do have something in the chat. So I will periodically be checking. So someone said who made the move with you? And that's another great one. Okay, we got 3 more and then we'll move on. Are you looking for work in agriculture or were you looking for work in agriculture?
So what do we ask here?
Yeah. What type of work are or were you looking for? Again, that verb tense, depending on when you're talking to them. If you're talking about a move that happened, you know, 6-7 months ago, you know, what type of work were you looking for when you first arrived? Or if you're doing it within the first 60 days, what type of work are you currently looking for? Great. The work you do is seasonal, right? How would we rephrase that?
What type of work?
How long did you do the work?
Yeah. How long did you do this work? What type of activities do you do at this location? Again, we understand that seasonal and temporary, even some of our other terminology could be interpreted by families very differently, or even potential stakeholders. I'll give you a really quick example, the word migrant. Not everybody understands the real meaning of the word migrant. They'll confuse it with what other word has it been confused for in the past?
Immigrant.
Immigrant, yeah. So don't take for granted that they understand what you're talking about. So what type of activities do you do at this location? And then you determine based on what they're telling you, whether this information is seasonal or if you have to ask additional clarifying questions. Great. And the last one is your job doesn't last all year, right? So you're working with chickens, so your job doesn't last all year, right?
How long does the job last?
How long did you work at this job? How long did the job last?
Yeah, or all of those are great. I have as an example, how long will you be working at this location or how long did you work at this location? Great, thank you so much. So as you can see, that's gonna elicit longer answers than just a simple yes, no, because again, the family doesn't know whether, well, should I be saying yes? Should I be saying no? And if they go, your job lasts all year, right? Or doesn't last, no, it does, because they might be thinking, what's the point of helping you as a potential family or potential migrant family if you're not going to be here very long? They don't understand that what we're really looking for is the folks that are here on a short period of time. So these open-ended questions gather more information when you're talking to families. Great job, guys. So our next so now that we know the type of questions and sort of how they should be framed, of course, I'm not telling you that you need to ask them specifically the way I had them on there. Some of you came up with your own version of it, and that's perfectly fine. So now that we know what sort of questions to ask and how to phrase, how does that work into our marketing the migrant program or this elevator pitch that we have? Well, for some of you that don't know, an elevator pitch is a clear, brief message or commercial about your organization. So it serves as like your digital business card or your verbal business card to someone. It communicates who you are, what you do, and how, and this is really important, and how you can both benefit from this new partnership. 3 things that a good elevator pitch has: it is persuasive, so you're using language that's sparking that person's interest. It's natural in conversation, so it doesn't look like it's scripted, because again, as long as it feels natural. If it feels scripted, they might think you're trying to do something that you're not trying to do. And it should be brief, hence the name. So the reason for it being called an elevator pitch is because it shouldn't last more than an elevator ride. So I love this little cartoon. I actually have this on in my office, because this says I've got an elevator pitch, an escalator pitch, and just to be safe, a stairway pitch, just to ensure that they don't pass up anybody who they need to speak with. So I really like this little cartoon. So when you're building your elevator pitch, you're wanting to look for keywords. Now, keywords are important because they are the link between what people are searching for and the content you are providing to fill that need. And you want to determine which words in each sentence of your speech you want to make the biggest impact. So I'll give you an example. When you go out, I know right now because of COVID, we may not be going out as much, but typically when you go out, to a shopping center or a shopping mall, if there's something that says free, whether you are interested in it or not, you're going to stop to see what it is. Or at least try to figure out what's going on in that area. So that free word, that's a key word. People know that that's going to hook you enough to see if you're actually interested. And you may say, no, I already saw it. It wasn't anything I need. But you already know that it's not what you need because you took a second of your time to actually go and see what it was. So these are the type of impacts we want when we're given our elevator pitch to families or potential stakeholders. These key words that are going to have someone go, wait a minute, I can use that. And so they can give you a little bit more of their time. So some keywords, as you can see on your screen now, you've got the word help, school assistance, family support, graduation goal, free, bilingual, community resources, confidential, and benefits. Now, again, they're not just limited to these, but from other trainings that we've done, these are some of the words that some folks have said, yeah, this has really helped me when creating my elevator pitch, because it does have someone go, oh, this is completely confidential. Nobody other than people in the school system who are there to assist me and my family, no one else is going to know about this information. So immigration's not going to know. Someone else outside of the organization isn't going to know. So that it does capture or hook that individual that you're speaking to. Now, with regards to keywords, you want really good keywords that are going to, again, provide that big impact, but you also want to make sure to know which ones to avoid. Now, this is going to depend on your area, on your region, on your state, whatever you've seen on the ground. And some of the words that we were told sort of at the beginning of the pandemic were, well, the word migrant, we know that is enough to sort of scare some potential migrant families or youth. The first thing is they go, oh no, I'm a citizen of this country when we use the word migrant. Or if you're talking to a potential farmer, they go, no, we're done talking. I don't hire anyone who isn't legal. And again, that already puts this negative look because they're shutting the doors saying, no, we're done. We're no longer interested in what you have to say. The other words were reporting and required. And this started again at the beginning of the pandemic because people were going, some of these migrant health centers were going out into migrant camps and saying, we are required to report people who are not isolating or quarantining when they're supposed to. And it really scared people across the country. So we really want to ensure that we're not using those words or whatever keywords that you need to avoid in your area to ensure that all of the conversations that you have with your families and potential stakeholders are neutral and they're all welcomed. Any questions on this before we move on? Any keyword that anybody has seen in Arkansas that will not work, that they got some negative feedback from? I don't know if anybody's seeing anything. I don't know if it's muted or not, but we'll keep going. But if there is, please make sure that you put it in the chat or we take some time to go over that.
They're all silent.
Okay, great. So then we're looking at the elevator pitch. So again, your elevator pitch should be formed or should have some structure to it. The first is the introduction, which leads to the conversation, which then leads to your actual pitch or your sales pitch, and that closing. The closing is equally important as every other part of this pitch, because we want to make sure we have a really strong closing and families understand what's the next step. What's happening now that we've had this conversation, what's happening next. So again, in the introduction, really simple. Who are you? Who do you represent? Why are you calling or visiting? And what are you offering? This is sort of what you want in the introduction, because again, if you start with, my name is Loopy, I've been working, for the Arkansas Migrant Education Program for the last 13 years, and I really like, if it doesn't sound like something someone's interested in, they will shut down, especially because they don't have a lot of time. We understand that our migrant families and even some of our stakeholders, they don't have hours and countless hours to give us. We need to do it quick, and it needs to be as brief as possible without leaving out any of the important details you want them to know. The second is that conversation. Small talk. Create small talk if you need to. I'll give you an example. I was asked to do a re-interview in another state, didn't know the area, had never been. I think I was probably 2.5 years into the migrant program at that point, and they sent me across the country to conduct re-interviews for another state. I had knocked at this house several times and didn't get an answer. Finally, I went back in the afternoon or in the evening, and I knocked, and somebody opened the door, but they sort of kept it halfway opened, so I could sort of see them if I kind of looked over, but it was you could tell that someone was not necessarily interested in having a conversation. So the first thing I did, because I looked around and I looked at my surroundings, is I said, you have really pretty plants. My dad's a landscaper, and he's been a landscaper his whole life, and he has a green thumb, obviously, and so do you. Unfortunately, I don't. What do you do to keep your flowers so pretty? And then just that one little, you have really pretty flowers, got that person to go, oh, well, I actually do a mixture of soap. I think she gave me like this little recipe of soap, water, and some other little ingredients that she puts in there. She said, I spray them all down and it removes the plague, and then it gives them a chance to grow. And I was like, oh, that's really cool. So we had a really quick small talk as we were first introducing ourselves, which made her feel a little more comfortable. So create small talk in any way you can. Look at your surroundings, see if there's anything that you can talk about, whether it's toys outside, my son had the same toy, or my son loved this toy, or anything that you can start that rapport with that individual. So that leads to you creating that connection with them. They feel, if I give this opportunity for this family member or this mom or this dad to teach me, it's a teachable moment for me. They feel now that they have something to offer in the conversation. So that's a great way to make that connection. So she was able to teach me how to properly keep plants alive. Although I did tell her that, and some of you, if you've been in my other training sessions, you've heard me probably say this before, I consider myself a plant hospice worker. Like, plants come to me before they go meet Jesus. That's just how it is. I have never been able to keep plants alive. My dad's very disappointed because he's, taught me since I was a kid. Just doesn't happen. I just don't have the touch, I guess. You want to ensure that you're gauging interest. So again, whether it's by that small talk or saying, hey, you've got kids, I see that you have kids. I have this wonderful program that helps families with children ages between, and then you start your pitch. Then you start giving that information that you need to ensure that they get. And last but not least, for the conversation part of it, you want to listen and you want to learn. One of the biggest mistakes that we do is we think we're really good listeners, but we're really not. And this is studies that have been done, and I don't have the source with me at this moment, but studies say that when you're talking to someone or when someone's talking to you, instead of you just shutting down and listening to what they're saying, you're already creating this conversation that you're going to put back out there. So if they're talking about, oh yeah, my son, loves tractors, you're going, oh, I have a really great tractor story that I'm going to tell her about. And just as soon as she stops talking, and you stop listening. So it's really important that as our families are giving us their information, that we try to kind of shut this down and allow us to really listen to what they're saying and really learn. It's going to create a better rapport because you're going to know that you are actually paying attention, nod as they're talking if you truly agree with, with what's going on. But it does create that better piece of rapport than if you would just saying, oh yeah, by the way, yeah, my son loves tractors too, and he had a blue tractor when he was little, because now that person goes, they didn't listen to anything else I said. What is the point? Your pitch should bait and hook. So you want to hook them early. Again, those little keywords. I'm offering a free program that offers family support to children of farm workers. So someone who has that in their family can go, oh, wait a minute, that sounds like me. So now I'm a little more interested. Now, when you are doing your pitch about children, I have a great program for kids ages blank to blank, you really need to know who your target audience is. So I'm not going to give the same information to a family member, to like a mom or a dad, or someone who has small children, as I would to an out-of-school youth. Similarly, I wouldn't be talking to a farmer the way I would be talking to a school administrator. So you have to know who your audience is and really target that elevator pitch with those keywords for those particular audiences. I've seen many recruiters out in the field that they really want to talk to OSY, and they get out there and they're really excited, but then their pitch is geared more towards school. Now, we hear a lot of the word school being mentioned in their pitch, and you automatically see this youth begin to shut down and not interested. They're saying, I'm here to work. I don't have time for school. So at this point, you've lost them, because they're thinking this person is going to try to get me into school, and that's not what I'm here for. So again, knowing who your audience is going to be super important. Also figuring out what's important to them. So we want to talk a lot, but we really want to listen and ask them, what is important to you? What can I do to assist you? What do you need help with? What would you like to learn more about since you're new in this area? So listen to them and see what's important to them. And then if you have great resources, you can then say, oh, I know someone who can help with that. If I can't, I have someone who can. And again, that starts building that relationship and that rapport with those potential people. And again, remember, how can the MEP help them? Whether it's an out-of-school youth, I can help you, because if you're looking, excuse me, if you're looking for information on a clinic because you need something, if I can't do it, I can sure go to some other organization that I've partnered with, and they can give you more information. So you're showing that they are really important to you as not just by being in your program, but say, hey, you may not qualify for my program, but I still want to help you out. Here's some more information. And lastly, that closing, that call to action. What happens now? Well, you want to make sure that you're exchanging information, excuse me, that you're exchanging information, whether, it's a business card that you're handing over. I always have to put this in, especially nowadays, if they're not comfortable with receiving something on paper, do you have this in a digital format? Can you send them a digital business card with your contact information? And then you want to ensure that you're following up in a timely manner. So if you say, I have someone who can help with that, let me give them a call, you don't necessarily just want to leave with, I'm going to give them a call and I'll reach out to you whenever. I will reach out to you by Friday, whether I have a response or not, just so you know that I am 100% invested in assisting you. So that's going to be extremely important. For my new recruiters in the room, do not make any promises. I'd like to sort of end that sentence there. Don't make any promises. But of course, I'll follow it up with that you can't keep, because that is the number one way to discourage a migrant family from investing in your program. And that is not only a good way for that to happen, but negative word of mouth spreads quickly. And the last thing you want is someone telling you, hey, I was told by the neighbor that I probably shouldn't be talking to you because you're not really someone who keeps their word, or you say you're going to do something and you don't do it. So you want to ensure that you're following up and that you're not keeping or making any promises. Any questions on that before we move on? All right, we'll move on. So we talked a lot about what an elevator pitch is. So what shouldn't you do in an elevator pitch? Well, you want to avoid what I'm probably doing now. speaking too fast. Yes, you only have a short amount of time, but try to avoid cramming 15 minutes of information into only 1 minute. Use your keywords to really spark their interest. Once you use the word, free lunch, then they may stop you and say, wait a minute. So all of my kids get free lunch and they just get free lunch by being in the program. And then you can certainly now take more time because now you've bought their interest. They're interested in what you have to say. But try to keep yourself from speaking a little too fast. Don't use technical terms or acronyms. Do you remember what it was like? Or new recruiters probably are experiencing this now, but my experienced recruiters, do you remember what it was like? MEP, COE, QAD, EWD, all of these acronyms that we have in our program that we were like, oh my goodness, that's so much to remember. So you want to avoid words that would confuse the average person. They don't know what a COE is. So if you're talking to them, all I need to do is fill out a COE and we'll see if you're eligible, you're going to lose them and you're going to make them feel dumb. And what this is going to do is this may shut that window or that door that you just opened. So using or substituting words like COE with application might be a little better fit. You want to avoid rambling. You need to keep your pitch clear and focused. And practicing your pitch ensures that you are clear and concise. Again, I've seen recruiters who start the elevator pitch really, really well, but then you see where they start talking about one particular service that they provide, and then we go off on that service tangent. So we want to make sure that we don't confuse and we don't lose our families in our pitch. Avoid being monotone. Now, I know this isn't easy for everybody, but you want to modulate your voice to keep listeners interested and keep your facial expressions friendly. Keep your energy level high, positive, and enthusiastic. Because again, no one wants to sit there talking to a grouch. And sometimes, like, especially, I work quite a bit in the evenings. And by the time it comes down to like my last employment service that I'm calling, maybe my voice on the phone doesn't sound as cheerful, as happy as it did originally, but I have to figure out a way to keep my level energy high, especially because now it's on the phone and that's all they're really getting from me is how I sound. So I want to keep it the energy level high, positive, and as enthusiastic as possible. And lastly, don't forget the benefits. Make sure your pitch tells the listener how they can benefit from your program, because this new partnership should be beneficial to both parties. So not only are you going to remember to tell them, this is what I can do for you, but this is how, by you allowing me to come and speak at your engagement, whether it's the extension office or a church, I will come and help set up. So I'll come here 30 minutes earlier. Tell me when you're setting up and I will come and help you set up, since you're helping me, by allowing me to come and talk to your congregation or to your people in your office. So you want to make sure that they understand how they can benefit from your program. Any questions before we move on to actual interview skills and questions? All right. So interview skills. This first set of questions help establish a migrant or migratory agricultural worker. So again, you don't have to use the questions exactly like you see them on the screen, but they sort of should elicit that longer response than a yes or no, and you want to avoid using leading questions if at all. Well, I will say at all costs, but we understand that sometimes clarification questions should start with, I understand you told me, however, am I understanding this correctly? And that could seem like a leading question, but it wouldn't necessarily be if it's a clarifying question. So the first question we have for when you start talking or start a conversation with someone, when did you most recently arrive to this area? If you know this family is a family that continues to come back to this area, when did you most recently return? We can't take for granted that just because this family has been to Michigan every year for the last 5, that they're coming back from that same location and have done the same qualifying work as before. So you just want to start with, when did you most recently arrive or return to this area? This establishes the established worker date and or the qualifying arrival date. And you want to make sure that the move occurs within 36 months of the eligibility interview. Where did you move from, or what brings you to this area? And again, I'm not saying this is the format or this is the first, second, third way to ask it, but you might have to rephrase the question. So where did you move from, or what brings you to this area? This determines if the move was a qualifying move. So if they're telling you, oh, I came back to this area because the school systems are really great and you guys are offering extra, protection because of COVID or whatever, so I wanted my family safe, that I quit my job and I decided to come here for specifically this wonderful program that you have. May not be a qualifying move. So you want to make sure that you're ensuring that it is. Who made this most recent move with you? This question makes sure to capture everyone who made the move, including additional children or adults or additional migratory agriculture workers that may have been missed otherwise. So I'll give you an example. And again, this is from recruitment sweeps that I've done with other recruiters in other places, where they're there to shadow me. But once I kind of let them go and let them do a couple on their own, I hear, hi, what brought you to this area? But then when they get to the actual question about who's the worker or who did the work, they'll say, have you worked in any of these following industries? And then they'll say, no, I haven't. I've always done hotel work. And then the recruiter goes, oh, okay, so no work of any other sort in the last 3 years. Nope. Restaurant work, and just hotel. That's pretty much all I've done. And they go, oh, okay, well, thank you so much. And I'm going, well, wait a minute. We didn't ask, is there anyone else in the home? Because again, if they're part of a family unit, there could be another potential, migratory agriculture worker in the home that we're not talking to. And the family or the individual that you're speaking to may not go, well, wait a minute, do you also want to know about X, Y, and Z in my household? That's not their job. It's our job to ensure we're asking the right questions. What type of work are you? Again, and this is where you start asking for more people depending on how this conversation is going. If you know it's a single mom, there's probably no reason to ask for your spouse or anyone else in the home if you've already determined that the family or that the individual is by themselves. But what type of work are you, your spouse, or anyone in the home currently engaged in? This determines if the work is qualifying or non-qualifying. How long after your arrival did you, again, or depending on if you're talking about the spouse or anyone in the home, start working? This determines if the work was engaged in soon after the move, within that 60-day period. Now, if the work currently being done is not qualifying work, so we've gotten to this point and they go, yeah, I came here and when I got here, I started working at a restaurant. Okay, well, have you, again, or your spouse or anyone in the home looked for or engaged in other work? If so, what type of work? This individual may have engaged in qualifying work prior to the interview or have actively sought qualifying work but did not engage. So you want to make sure that any qualifying work is engaged in soon after the move. Now, what I mean by this is, let's say it's been 7 or 8 months since the family moved in. If you ask, what type of work are you doing now? They could tell you, well, right now I'm working at Burger King. Well, that's not a qualifying activity, so I'm sorry, you don't qualify. But had you asked, have you or anyone else engaged in other work since you've gotten here? Oh yeah, I'm working at Burger King now. Before that, I worked at a laundromat. And before that, I worked for 3 whole days, in the sweet potato field. And now you can start asking about that particular information or bit of information there. Are you, your spouse, or anyone in the home interested in other work if they happen to be telling you, I'm doing construction work? This may determine if this move could possibly be one of those actively sought moves. Yeah, I'm doing construction now because when I first got here, I was going to do the sweet potato. And then they told me that I couldn't get a job because they weren't hiring as many employees this year because of COVID. They still have to follow the social distancing, rules or protocols. They can't house as many people as they used to on the farm anymore. So yeah, I was interested in being in the sweet potato industry, but now I got to do something else because I need to survive. So what happens if the work is being done in a location that is in operation year round? That means this facility, wherever it may be, a poultry plant, a beef processing plant, a nursery, it is open year round. So 365 days a year, except for the obvious holidays like Labor Day and all that good stuff. You could ask, how long is the employment going to last if the 12 months aren't up yet from the time that they came in to the area and engaged in that work? Or how long did the employment last if it's now after 12 months? And it's really important because we know based on the non-regulatory guidance that you need to determine an individual to be working less than 12 months at these temporary or year-round locations. That's why it's called temporary employment, because they need to be employed on a temporary basis. So again, this can be determined by the individual himself or by an employer. So I can tell you, well, I worked there less than, I think it was like a full 6-7 months, between 6 and 7 months. Or if you have a great rapport with the employer, they can tell you, oh, Loopy only worked there about 7 months. Remember, if the length of time of 12 months or less cannot be established, so they tell you, well, I'm still working there and I'm not sure how long I'm going to stay. I just know that for the time being, I'm going to stay, but I can't tell you exactly how long. That work is not considered temporary work or temporary employment. So we have to then move on to a different, to a prior move that hopefully establishes a migratory agricultural worker. Have you ever done this type of work before? If so, how long did you remain employed at this job site? And the reason for this question is this can determine whether or not the individual has worked at year-round job sites for more or less than 12 months. So if I tell you, I can't remember, I don't know how long I'm going to stay. So far right now with COVID, I want to stay still. I have a job. I'm grateful for my job. Okay, well, have you ever done this type of work before? Yeah, I did work at this chicken processing plant in Alabama last year. Okay, how long did you remain employed at that job site? Well, that one was probably 6 months because everyone started getting sick and they started laying people off, so about 6 months. So again, you start determining some sort of pattern. Thinking back on how long you've worked at this other job sites, how long do you think you remain employed here? And again, these are more when they're telling you they're going to stay there forever, or they don't give you a definite end date or end time frame. So thinking back on how long you've worked at these job sites, how long do you think you'll remain employed here? And this question makes one final attempt at establishing a pattern of temporary or permanent work. So if you ask me and I say, well, you know what? I worked at the poultry plant in Alabama for 2.5 years. And then before that, I was in Montana at a beef processing plant and I worked there 3 years. I'll probably end up staying between 2 or 3 years now that I'm thinking about it. Well, then unfortunately, they don't meet eligibility criteria. You can look for other previous history or previous moves within the last 36 months. Or they can say, you know what, I worked in Alabama for 6 months, and that was due to the pandemic in 2020. But in 2019, I also worked in Montana, and I was there between 2 and 3 months because the conditions are really, really bad. So I'll probably won't stay longer than 7 months. There you go. Now you have established a pattern of temporary employment, and you can use that statement of 7 months for this particular work that they're doing now, as long as the family is saying, so now thinking about it, I probably won't stay here where I'm currently at longer than X amount of months. Any questions on that before we move in, or any clarifications that are needed before we go to questions revolving migratory children? Okay, don't hear anything, so I'll just keep moving. If we have them, please put them in the chat, or one of, yes?
Can you hear me? Okay. Patty
Yes.
Sosa from the Rogers District.
Hi.
One of the questions that I was thinking about as you were going through all of the questions that you have is our enrollment for our district for any new students that come. We do everything online now. And so in that procedure, we have a question that says, and I can't remember it off at the top of my head, but it says, have you been involved in any agricultural work? And I just didn't know if there was a way to break it down even further to where, you know, because like you're saying, some people get scared off with migrant or get scared off with, you know, and I don't even know if people understand what agriculture means. So I didn't know if there was a way for us to make that question a little bit easier for us to be able to determine whether or not they could qualify?
That's a great question. So thank you for that. I ultimately it's up to your State Department to, change any forms or add any questions. However, I will share that some districts in other or some school systems in other states have gone to actually depicting using pictures of certain activities or certain work in the fields. Like they'll put a picture of some vegetables, they'll put pictures of some cows or some chickens, depending on what's in their immediate area, to really kind of, again, hook that reader to go, oh wait, I do that, what does that say? And then they're sort of able to mark down more of, it's almost like a little checkbox or checklist right next to these pictures. That could be something. Again, please make sure that you talk to your REDS team and your State Department team first. But we have seen folks specifically add pictures to better showcase what they're talking about. So under agricultural work, it'll have even fishing, it'll have boats, it'll have greenhouses or nurseries or plants, something that to trigger that individual to say, oh, I work in the nursery, I didn't know that was agricultural. Or for example, in fishing, in more of the areas where there's fishing, they'll have a picture of nets and cages. So where the lobster, the lobster cages or whatever. Now, why would they have picture of a lobster cage? Because some people move into that location specifically to fix those cages or pens, and that could be considered qualifying work in the event that it's part of that production or initial processing, meaning without these cages, we couldn't do anything else in this, in this fishing industry. That's how important it is and how integral it is for the job that we're doing. So, and again, if you think of agricultural, you probably just think of greenery and trees and vegetables. You're not thinking of that other piece of it, like the trees and the fishing and all that stuff. So maybe I hope I answered sort of your question, but if I didn't, let me know.
Yes, you did. Thank you. Thank you.
You're welcome. All right, so moving on to interview skills, establishing a migratory child. Now, let's say we interviewed someone, we have someone who meets the definition of a migratory agricultural worker or migratory fisher. So now you're asking information pertaining to, do we have children that meet the definition of a migratory child? So how many of the children made this most current move with you? And this is going to determine if any or all of the children made the move either with or to join the migratory agricultural worker. Many times as COE reviewers, we'll see where the move doesn't make a lot of sense. So we're marking with, but then we've marked two different dates in the 2BI, so we're going to call for clarification. So what's wrong with the COE, or can you give me more information? And sometimes we find that we've got missing children on a COE because you asked me how many kids moved. This many kids moved with me. I didn't, so I have to tell you the ones that also moved with my husband. So again, families don't know. So how many of the children made this most current move with you allows them to go, well, all of the ones that made the move here were 3 out of 5, the other 2, and then you can start discussing about those children's move. Another way could be, when did the children arrive? It determines the possible QAD. Make sure that it occurred within 36 months of the eligibility interview date. That's always very important. Have any of the children graduated from high school or obtained their GED? Again, determines if the children are still eligible for free public education in your state. Now, what happens if any of the children moved before the worker or after the migratory agricultural worker? Well, you still want to know, when did the children arrive to this area, because it's going to determine the child's date of arrival or possible QAD. And I'm saying possible because we know that if the worker, if the child preceded the worker, the qualifying arrival date, which is the date the move is complete, is not going to be when the child arrived. It's going to be when the family's finally together as a unit, or when the worker arrives. So when did the children arrive to this area determines the child's possible QAD. And again, you want to make sure that the move occurred within 12 months of the worker's move, because to join or proceed, the guidance says it needs to be within 12 months. There are extenuating circumstances, and that's handled by your state based on your, if your state has its own sort of restrictions or added information to that, but usually it's 12 months from the worker's move. Why didn't the children move or travel with you or with the worker? So this establishes the reason for the children's move to join or precede the migratory agricultural worker. Remember that you do need a comment on that COE that says, why didn't the children and the worker come together? You also want to record the reason for the 2 different move dates, and whether the migratory agricultural worker moved from a different location than the children in the comment section. And that's per the instructions on how to complete a certificate of eligibility. So that's not something that, you know, we're making up. It's actually part of the instructions. Now, if any children moved from a different place of residence than the worker, you know, who was responsible for the children before they came to live with you? So think of those cases where you have mom and dad and their children, and they're eligible for the program. You've already gone through the eligibility, you know, checklist, and they meet all of the criteria. And then they tell you, hey, my niece and nephew are just arrived last week to live with me. So the family's letting you know there are more children in the home. So you want to make sure you're asking who was responsible for the children before they came to live with you, because this can determine that the child meets the economic necessity component of a qualifying move. Remember that both the worker and the child must meet the qualifying move component. So with that said, I want to remind you that a qualifying move has 3 components. The first is the move is due to economic necessity from one residence to another, and the third is from one school district to another. Now, when the family is traveling together as a unit, the children's qualifying move or economic necessity and changing residences, it's all the same as the worker because they're moving together, so that the child's financial need is dependent on that worker's financial need. So if I pick up and move my whole family, if I have economic necessity, so do my children. That's different, however, when you have custody issues or when you have a child who was not with the immediate family for you know X amount of time, where someone else, so the child's financial need was dependent on someone else. How are these children then moving to your area due to economic necessity? One reason could be they could no longer provide for them in the place where they were. So let's say their kids are staying with abuelita and abuelitos, or grandma and grandpa in their home country. Grandma and grandpa can't afford to provide for those children anymore. So they're saying they're going to have to return to you because we can no longer afford to provide for them. So who was responsible for the children before they came to live with you? My parents, but they can no longer provide for the children, so they have to come to me. Now these children's economic necessity is dependent on you, the worker, or on the worker. So you're ensuring that they are meeting that economic necessity component of a qualifying move. Any questions on that? Because that could be a little trickier, it could be a little confusing. All right, we'll stop if we need to. So now we're getting to the point where we're asking clarifying questions. Now this is probing during the interview. So as I mentioned before, you don't have to stick to that particular script. You can, excuse me, you can ask the questions in whichever format you feel comfortable, as long as we're staying away from leading questions and you're able to answer all of the questions that you need to determine eligibility. But there will be times where you need to ask additional questions or clarifying questions during the interview. So as a recruiter, you will experience times where you feel like you need additional information to make a valid eligibility determination. Whether you didn't understand where the move happened from and to, you weren't sure of the qualifying work that was done or whether it meets the components of qualifying work, but you need additional information. And so again, some of the reasons: interviewee statements are unclear, you're not quite sure. The recruiter is unfamiliar with the qualifying work prior or even in the current location. You're not sure if picking fern or cutting fern to make ornamental wreaths qualifies for the program. Bonus points if someone can tell me if it qualifies or not in the comment section or in the chat box. If there are questions regarding economic necessity, if you're not sure, well, wait a minute, you said you left your place of employment, you quit your job and I just need a little more information. The worker is unclear if the nature of the job is temporary. Again, you're going to have to ask probing questions. They're either going to tell you, I'm not sure how long I'm going to stay, or they're going to give you a time frame. And the last one is one that we don't normally see, but it has happened. And this is when the recruiter suspects the family has not been truthful. And again, this isn't the norm by any means, but if you truly feel that something isn't quite right, you really need to listen to that recruiter instinct, because at the end of the day, you are the one signing that document saying you are satisfied with the information that was provided to you by the person who's you interviewed. So you really need to ask clarifying questions or additional probing questions if something doesn't feel right. So let's say you're trying to establish a more accurate qualifying arrival date or establish worker date. So for example, when was the last time that you made a move? And they're saying, well, I'm not quite sure. I mean, I moved so much and we moved so much, and my husband's not here to really remind me of where we've been. I really don't know. You could ask, or you could try referencing important events like birth dates, anniversaries, or holidays. So, when did you and your family arrive in this area? I'm not quite sure. I don't remember. It may have been in the summer, but it was hot. I remember that. Okay, so was it before or after school started? Did your children start school here, or were they in school, did they start school somewhere else? Oh, wait a minute. So I came here in the summer or when it was hot. And no, I actually went and filled out a registration packet because it's online now. And I remember I didn't like that. And I filled out my packet here in this area. Okay, so now we're getting more of this frame of reference of when more or less this date could be. Was it before or after someone's birthday? So again, you need the birth dates anyway for the COE. So you can try referencing if you see some of the kids' ages, or you can say, did someone have a birthday? If so, do you remember who celebrated that birthday? Oh yeah, no, we were back in Michigan because the comadre was there. And obviously she doesn't live here. So it had to have been, I was there in Michigan or wherever the prior location might have been. Do you remember celebrating a holiday or event? Now, even though our families don't participate or don't partake in a lot of the events, they know that's happening. One of the biggest ones that my parents, when I was little and we came from Mexico to the US, was Halloween. It still freaks them out probably to this day because it's something we're not used to. So she would remember exactly things around Halloween because she would say, that's when, in Spanish, she would say, es cuando salen las brujas, or in English saying, that's when the witches come out, because people would be dressed up for Halloween. So again, that helps you narrow down a bit more to establish a more accurate QAD or establish worker date. And remembering that these dates for families, when you're talking to them, it's a guesstimate at best. Some of them can pinpoint exactly the same date because of something that happened, but more or less, it was at the beginning of the month or the middle of the month or the end of the month. And if I'm thinking, probably about the 20th maybe. So it's just a guesstimate at best, but it lets you hone in on a little bit better. And remember that a child may be identified as a migratory child if that child made a qualifying move as with or to join or precede someone who is a migratory agricultural worker, and that the QAD and the established worker dates may be different dates. They don't always have to match. Establishing economic necessity. The migratory agricultural worker and migratory child's move must have occurred because there was some sort of financial need or hardship in order to establish economic necessity. So again, these are the probing questions. These isn't what you're going to lead with. But if work was still available here, would you still have moved to Georgia to pick the watermelon if the work was here? Or if the work was still available in Georgia, would you still have moved? And again, this is just to get a reference of, well, no, if there was work available here, I surely wouldn't have moved. I moved because I needed the work. There is the financial need that we're looking for. Did you have paid time off from work during your travel to, and then wherever they're going to? Did you take time off from work to travel to that other location? And this is more specifically for families who tend to, in the summer specifically, or during winter break, they will come back and they'll tell you, I just got back from Mexico and we spent the holidays out in Mexico. So we spent Christmas, a new year out there, or I went for the summer so my kid for vacation so my kids can see their abuelita and abuelito. So that sounds like a vacation. We know based on the non-regulatory guidance that taking a vacation is not considered a financial hardship. So then you can ask, did you have paid time off from work? No, I didn't have paid time off from work. I left because the work ended and I can't afford to stay here. So we went to Mexico, might as well. I mean, it's during the summer. So that way we lived out there with family and we didn't have to have this extra bills that we're paying here. That sounds like financial hardship. Versus oh yeah, I specifically wait and I save all of my time for the summer because that's when kids are out of school. And then I tell my boss, taking my 3 weeks and I'm going to Mexico. And then of course that wouldn't be, according to the guidance, a person who leaves a place where he or she lives, for example, to visit family or friends, attend a wedding or other event, take a vacation, have an educational or recreational experience, or to take care of a legal matter would not have changed residence due to economic necessity because that person did not go to the new place because of financial need. And it actually goes on to say, similarly, those people would not be returning back to their place of residence because of economic necessity. So you don't have it going out, you don't have it coming back in. Establishing seasonal employment. So we know that seasonal employment occurs only during a certain period of the year because of the cycles of nature. Now, the type of work, however, if you were in my last workshop, we talked about, does it matter how long someone's going to remain employed for this one farmer? Like we'll pick the sweet potatoes. So does it matter how long I work in the sweet potato farm if I am planting the sweet potatoes during, seasonal time, because that's dependent on the cycles of nature. And then I'm picking them. So I'm harvesting during the harvesting season, but then I stay there. And while there's no work on the actual sweet potatoes or working with the sweet potatoes, I'm staying and I'm fixing the tractor and I'm making sure that all the fences are mended, all that stuff. Does it matter how long I'm going to stay? And the answer is, yeah, it does. According to the guidance, and this is G7 of the non-regulatory guidance, people who are hired to work a series of different activities for the same employer in the same location are not working seasonally or temporary. So you can ask the following questions. Is this location open during only certain periods of the year? No, it's open 365 days a year. So the work that you're doing at this packing house, you're packaging vegetables, fruits and vegetables. So what happens? How did you, well, they ship in different vegetables and fruits from all over the country. And so we're sitting here packaging them depending on the crops cycles of nature, sure, but we get work continuously because they're just shipping in all this stuff to us. That may not be considered seasonal employment. Does this type of work have a beginning or an end date? How long are you hired to work at this farm or location? And when does your employment end? Again, if they can't tell you my employment ends after I pick the potatoes or the sweet potatoes, you want to ensure that this isn't just a series of activities they're doing for the same employer, because that may not qualify. Remember that the phrase cycles of nature is used to describe the basis for why certain types of employment in agriculture or fishing work only occur during certain limited periods in the year. Seasonal employment may not be continuous or carried on throughout the year. So it's really important. Establishing temporary employment. Temporary employment means employment that lasts for a limited period of time, usually a few months, but no longer than 12 months. And it can be determined by a worker's statement or an employer statement. So again, some clarifying questions could be, can the individual work 365 days a year at this location? Yeah, we're a nursery. So when we're not planning, annuals, we're planning all kinds of stuff throughout the year. During October, November, December, we're doing pumpkins, we're doing mums for, in May, or not really quite sure when mums are, but I do know that I drive by my nurseries and I see mums everywhere. So yeah, I do work. This place is in operation 365 days a year, except for obviously the holidays. So then someone working at this location needs to be employed by this location for no longer than those 12 months. Does this location close down at any time during the year? Yeah, yeah, we're a nursery, but we only do the pumpkins because we grow them and then we harvest them and then that's it. So we shut down. There's nothing else to do after that. Then this location is not open 365 days a year. It may not be temporary employment, or it might be more sort of the seasonal aspect where it's only during the cycles of nature. And that's just going to depend on, again, that crop or that activity. How long are you hired to work for this farm or this location? I'm working at this nursery all year, but during that time, again, I'm doing different activities that the activities themselves depend on the cycles of nature, but not the length of employment. I work full time at this farm. Remember that jobs that occur only during a certain time of the year because of a holiday or event, for example, Thanksgiving, Christmas, Mother's Day, should be considered temporary employment because the time of the year that the work is performed is not dependent on the cycles of nature, but rather the holiday or event. So going back to that pumpkin patch, we're only doing pumpkins and then we're shutting down. So we grow them, we harvest them, we shut down. And if it's only for Thanksgiving and Halloween, for example, then this would be one of those temporary employments because the time of the year the work is performed is not dependent on the cycles of nature, but instead that holiday or event. We're almost done and we'll almost get to questions. So if you have any. So establishing to join moves. We need to remember that every to join move requires a comment, and we need the reason for the two different move dates and whether the worker moved from a different location or different locations than the child, because they could have traveled several different places. So why didn't the children travel with you? Could be a way of establishing the reason for the two different move dates. So the children didn't go with me because, or didn't come with me originally because they were finishing up their school in Michigan. And then once the school term ended, then they came. But I came first to secure that housing and my job, and they stayed behind. Or why did the children stay behind? Well, again, they stayed behind because they needed to finish something that had to do with school, or because I'm trying to secure, housing and a job. There's no point in bringing my entire family down if I don't have a job or a place to stay. I'm staying with a friend on my own, or as soon as I get my apartment or my house, then I'm going to move my children and my family. Who was responsible again for the children prior to arriving here with you? You just want to establish that the children are in fact meeting the component of a qualifying move. And what city or state did the children move from? So all of those different kinds of questions. Again, you're not going to ask them all at once, but you can pick and choose which question is appropriate depending on what you're needing to clarify. And remember that children must join the worker within 12 months. Again, there are some extenuating circumstances, but that's completely up to your state. The child's move must also meet the qualifying move criteria. This includes economic necessity. Also, record the reason for the two different move dates and whether the worker moved from a different location than the children in that comment section. In order to fully complete that document, we need that additional information for to join or proceed moves. Establishing actively sought. So for actively sought, we need to establish that the individual took positive actions to look for work. So what did they do to really look for work? Well, the guidance says they can do a couple of different things. The first is it has to be within soon after the move. So soon after 60 days, they were looking for that work. And either they moved reasonably believing the work was available, someone told them about the work being available, and that's why they moved, or someone applied for them on their behalf. So, hey, you need to hurry up and get here, Loopy. I will call, you can work in our crew too. I'll just let them know that you're interested. So come on over and I'll go and tell them that you're interested and willing to work. So how long after your arrival did you look for qualifying, or whatever that qualifying work was? I was going to pick the sweet potatoes, but I didn't get it. But I looked for it because as soon as I got here, I started looking for that work. I went and talked to a couple of people, but they said there was no work available. How did you know this type of work would be available? Well, my neighbor who I live here next to, they told me. They said, hey, I told them, hey, I don't have a job right now and I'm really looking. Do you know of any? Oh yeah, I'm working in the sweet potato field. If you're interested, I can let them know that you're interested. Who did you speak to regarding the sweet potatoes? Well, I spoke to my neighbor, and he told me that he can get me a phone number. I called and I spoke to the crew leader. So these are all different ways to get that clarifying information. And remember that a statement from the individual is sufficient to establish that he or she actively sought the qualifying work. No additional documentation is required beyond the individual's statement and the recruiter's use of the comment section. And what we mean by that is there's no reason to ask for check stubs or let me see an application that's dated, the last 30 days. Unless your state's specifically requiring any of this extra data or these documents, there's no need for them according to the non-regulatory guidance. Just what they tell you is enough. So you're just going to write that down in the comment section of your COE. Establishing recent history of moves. So for recent history of moves, we need 2 separate moves that must have resulted in the engagement of qualifying work according to the guidance. So pretty simple. How long ago did you actually do that work? So how long ago did you pick those tomatoes in Georgia? Oh, well, I was middle of last year. So like May, June, I'd say probably June 13th of 2020, I moved into Georgia and I picked those tomatoes. Okay, so in what city and state did you say? You said Georgia. Yep, Georgia. That's where I picked in Valdosta, Georgia. That's where I was. Because you need to know the location, the month and the year, and the qualifying work. Because for recent history of moves, again, they must have been moves. So you have to show that you moved somewhere. That's where the city or state come into play. It has to be within 36 months of the eligibility interview date. That's where the month and year come into play. And you have to have done the actual work. So what work did you actually do that was qualifying? And you need 2 of those. So then you would ask, are there any other cities or states where you've done this work or any type of work similar to this? Yeah. And then you just continue that line of questioning until you get your 2 recent history moves. And again, they must have occurred within 36 months from the eligibility interview date. Now, this might confuse some folks, but we can sure, if we have time for questions, we can address this. But they do not have to be across school district lines. So these recent history of moves just need to be due to economic necessity and from one residence to another. And again, a qualifying move has all 3: economic necessity, one residence to another, and one school district to another. But these recent history of moves do not. And an individual statement is sufficient to establish the recent history of moves. Provide the moves in the comment section. Any questions on this one? Usually there's some questions on this one, but if not, we'll move on. Well, actually, we're down to the end. So any additional questions or anything that needs to be clarified, we have a few minutes. Or Loranda, if any of your team needs to provide additional guidance that maybe is necessary in the state of Arkansas that I didn't cover for those particular moves. Don't know if you're muted, but I unfortunately can't hear anything.
Yes, ma'am. I just said in the state of Arkansas, don't be leading. Ask questions. Leading questions.
Yeah, no leading questions.
Okay, I have a question.
Sure.
Okay, so I had a family, and I'm just throwing this question out because in case anybody else wants to hear it. They moved. They had the job and then they moved. So we kind of debated whether that would be a qualifying move since they had acquired the job first. And then once they had the job, they ended up moving due to not being able to find a home.
That is a great question. I'm going to stop share because I do want to show where we find the information to that. So
Okay.
let me reshare. So we have our non-regulatory guidance, which is that blue book. Again, if you have a copy of the blue book, great. This is the full Microsoft Word version of it. The reason I like it is because I can actually click on Control on my keyboard, Control F, and that allows me to find certain sections rather quickly. So as you can see, I just pushed it and it gave me this little navigation panel. So the thing is, I want to look at what a qualifying move is. So, you know, just so I'm gonna type in qualifying move, and then it's gonna show me all of the places it talks about a qualifying move. So I'm just gonna scroll down using this little button up at the top, and then I'm going to get to where it says qualifying move. And I know it's D1, but again, for those folks that may not, you can navigate it this way. Now, we see a qualifying move is made due to economic necessity from one residence to another and from one school district to another. So that's the definition of a qualifying move. There is nothing else in this definition that says anything about the employment. Where it does say about the employment is if you look at what is a migratory qualifying worker, and that's going to be up in A, I believe it's no, maybe C1. There we go. So who is a migratory agricultural worker? And I'm going to blow this up so you can see it a little bit better if you're using well, I'm assuming some of you are using the screen, the projector. So who is a migratory agricultural worker? And it says is a person, and I'm going to highlight this, who in the preceding 36 months made a qualifying move. Remember, we already know what a qualifying move is. It's just those three components. And after doing so, engaged in new temporary or seasonal employment or personal subsistence in agriculture. So what does that mean? That means that after this individual made that qualifying move, they have to engage in new, and it's considered new because they don't want that type of scenario happening where they already had the job and now they're moving, and you can say, well, I'm moving 5 or 6 times around the state, but I never quit my job. I'm there all the time. So because of the language here, that particular family that you're referring to, they've made a qualifying move. Can you tell me more or less from like, well, I'll just say from District A to District B, and you're saying they had the job in District C? Is that what you're saying?
So they lived in, can I just say the place they
Yeah,
lived
I mean, if you're comfortable,
Okay.
as long as we're not sharing any PII, we should be good.
Yes. So they lived in, let's say they lived in Russellville, and then they had a job in Russellville, moved up, then they got a job in Darnell. So they got the job, and after they got the job, they moved.
So from Russellville, they were traveling back and forth to Darnell for that employment in Darnell, and then finally they moved into Darnell, but
Yes.
the job was the same. Okay, so in this case, the qualifying move would be the place where they went to the first time. So wherever they were prior to, and again, without getting all of the information, I'm not saying this is the eligibility determination, but this is what you would look for. You'd look for the move happening into Russellville. That's the qualifying move. And after that qualifying move was made, they got that new temporary or seasonal job in Darnell. That's the move we're looking for. The fact that they've moved again doesn't necessarily mean that the individual establishes him or herself as a migratory agricultural worker again, because we already have the move completed from wherever they were to Russellville, if that makes sense. So they're not now moving to Darnell to engage in new or temporary, in new temporary or seasonal employment as described here. So it has to be that they make a qualifying move, and after doing so, they engage in that new work. And it doesn't seem like this person did. Yeah. Now, LaRonda, if you and your team have anything to add, please feel free.
No, ma'am, I think you answered that pretty clearly. The move to Darnell would not be qualifying because they already had the work prior to the move. So you'd have to be looking further back into history.
Yep. All right.
That's not
Any other questions?
Sorry.
Any other questions? I would highly encourage every recruiter, whether you're, brand new or you're a seasoned recruiter, this guidance here, like I said, having it in a Word document where you can quickly search for and find that particular reference that you're looking for is really life-changing, because this is how we prepare and we train to ensure that we're interpreting this as accurately as possible. So keeping in mind that some states, like I said before, do have little exceptions, because this document tells us in some sections this is what we're looking for. However, your state can then add new guidance to this, but you guys have to have it in writing that this is what now you're asking for. So we do sort of like I don't want to say bare minimum, but what is required here, and then modify that based on other states if they need to. So any other questions? All right. Well, if you ever need anything, you've got an amazing team already with all of your reds and all of, you've got great staff. But if something, it's so crazy that you don't, you're all kind of stuck or in a jiffy, you need something, please make sure that you go through your current protocol of who can make calls to whom. But this is my contact information. You can pretty much reach me 24/7 because I always have my phone on me. But you've got my email address there and my telephone number in the event that, and we're really grateful to be able to work with Arkansas. I know that I have a good rapport with LaRonda and her team, and they are very good at calling if they need anything. But mostly, I mean, you guys have, for the most part, you guys have an amazing team that's always ready with an answer for you. So thank you so much. LaRonda, I'll just hand it over back to you.
Thank you, Loopy. Okay, remember guys, anyone group A or new tutor, we're gonna move up to 203 and everyone else will stay in here. Okay?
You're not for sure what group you're in.
If you're not for sure, ask your reds or your specialists.
Sandra,